Ladies and gentlemen, councillors, please be upstanding for the Mayor of the City of Clarence, Councillor Brendan Lomley.
Good evening and welcome all. Before proceeding, I pay my respects to the Mumarina people as the traditional and original custodians of the land on which we meet, and I acknowledge their continuing connection of the Tasmanian people to the skies, land and waterways. I pay respect to elders, past and present. Before we commence with tonight's council meeting, please let us all pause for a quiet moment of reflection and respect. Thank you, councillors. Please be seated. Well, good evening and welcome to the Clarence City Council meeting of Monday the 15th of May 2023. This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, and what is said in this meeting is not protected by privilege, and there is a link to the agenda papers on Council's website. Item number 2, apologies. There's no apologies. We have a full house tonight, which is wonderful. Item number 3, declarations of interest of councillors or close associate. Are there any declarations from councillors? There being none, I move on to our omnibus items. First one being 4.1, confirmation of the minutes. That the minutes of the council meeting held on the 24th of April 2023 have been circulated. Are there any issues arising? There being none, I move now on to item 4.2, Mayor's communication. And my diary has been circulated, as well as the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Alison Ritchie, Councillor Emma Goyne and Councillor Bree Hunter representing me as well. Moving now on to 4.3, Mayor's communication. There's nothing to report. Table 4.4, tabling of petitions. CEO, are there any petitions?
No, Mayor.
Thank you. Moving on to 4.5, reports from outside bodies. Councillor Walker, Copping Refuse Disposal Site Joint Authority. Anything to report?
Not at this time.
Thank you. Nothing on Tas Water Corporation. And with regards to the Greater Hobart Committee, nothing more to report there except to say that the Greater Hobart Mayors are scheduled to meet on Wednesday the 24th of May for our monthly meeting. Councillors, are there any other reports from council and special committees and other representative bodies? There being none, we move now on to 4.6, the weekly briefing reports. The weekly briefing reports of the 24th of April and the 1st and 8th of May 2023 have been circulated to councillors. Are there any matters arising? Councillor James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I refer to the 24th of April in relation to the planning appeal decision on 22 Thompson Way in Clifton Beach. On page 16, and I just would like to seek the planner's clarification on this, would the acting manager of city planning advise that as a result of the appeal that has been brought to the tribunal, is it read that the secondary dwelling that was part of the original application has been deleted, and now the only matter that has been subject to a permit, which has been agreed to all parties, is the main residence and a small hut or garage, I think it's shed, at the far end of the block. Could that be confirmed, please?
Thank you, Councillor James. Ms Olsen, are you able to answer that, please?
Through you, Mayor. I believe that's correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor James?
Yes, the other one is in relation to the 1st of May 2023, and it's regarding the applications approved by delegation with one representation on page 37. Page 37 refers to the one at Bingley Street in Howrah.
Page 37.
Hang on, it's no, it's page 36 of the weekly briefing report. In that, it says that applications approved by delegation with one representation received. However, in your letter to to a elector who had concerns, and I believe put in a representation, it says in part that I'm just trying to find it where
Councillor
it says...
James, can I just... I'll just
There were
interrupt you there.
there were three representations.
I'll just interrupt you there. It actually says, above that, on page 36, applications approved / refused by delegation, no extension of time agreed to.
That's right.
So that's the reason. It's also outlined in the letter, Councillor James. So I'm a little bit confused as to your question because it doesn't actually reference number of representations received or representors. It actually says, as the title says above this very box you're referring to, approved by delegation as no extension of time was agreed to.
Okay, I understand.
Thank you. Are there any other...
No, before we go
excuse me,
there is another question.
Councillor James, wait for the call. I'm not going to accept bad behaviour this evening.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Councillor
I'm only
James.
asking a question.
Councillor James, wait for the call.
And I haven't asked the question
Councillor
yet.
James, wait, because you haven't been given the call.
Deal with the
Councillor
same-
James.
Oh, for
Councillor
goodness
James.
sake. Goodness
Thank
gracious.
you. So to be very clear, because there's been a little bit of scuttlebutt about this issue here, it's clearly set out on page 36, the page you refer to, that this application was approved by delegation because no extension of time was agreed to. That was spelled out very clearly in the letter that you refer to, that I sent out today to the member of the public, that was CC'd to all councillors for your information. So can I take that then, Councillor James, that there is absolutely no issue here, and that it is very clear as to why this DA was approved?
No, I have a second question.
No. Is it clear as to why this delegation or why this DA was approved?
It is, but my question I want to ask...
You may ask
Thank
a
you very
third question,
much.
Councillor James.
My question through you to the acting planner, city planner, is that because there was an extension of time was not requested, is it...
No, excuse me, to be clear, an extension of time was requested. It wasn't agreed to, Councillor James.
That's right.
So let's be very clear about our language here.
Okay, Mr Mayor, I'm just trying to follow this up because the question I'm trying to ask is that does the staff have an opportunity to either approve it or refuse that particular application, given that no extension was granted? That's my question. My question is...
Thank you. The question's clear. Take your seat.
Yep.
CEO, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. The answer to that question is that the delegation allows officers to either approve or refuse in accordance with our assessment of the application against the planning scheme.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Mulder.
Yeah, I appreciate your rulings and I understand your letter and I've read it. Unfortunately, I think for those listening, that may not be the case. I believe the original issue related to the fact that this was approved as an amended application when in fact the representative had argued that it was a different application. I'm aware of the answer, but I think for the matter of public record that needs to be spoken.
Councillor Mulder, thank you. CEO, would you like to clarify this for everyone? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. The letter or the question that was raised by the member of the public certainly referenced an amended application, but the circumstances of this matter were a DA approved I think it was in 2021 or 2022 by council in respect to the property. That hasn't been acted upon. There was no minor amendment because this request for short stay accommodation didn't fit within the original permit at all. So it was put forward as a new application, assessed as a new application, and that's the basis on which the delegation was activated. So in the context of the delegations, there are two. One that deals with issues related to minor amendments, one that deals with substantive applications. It's the substantive application that was dealt with.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Moll, does that clarify to your satisfaction?
It clarifies it to me, but I think it's important when we're answering these sorts of questions, when we're dealing with this stuff, is that we realise that we're not talking about what I know, it's about what the people know. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll come to Councillor Warren in a moment, but just to be very clear here, Councillor Mulder, there was a little bit of ambiguity with the question, and some of the question actually wasn't correct in its substance either. So
yeah, that's why I asked the question.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate that. I really appreciate that. I think we've got to do our level best, all of us, to make sure that when we stand up here in public, they're actually bringing the facts to the table. Councillor Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I also have a question on this particular planning matter at 28 Bingley Street, Howrah, and I'll try and be clear in my question. It says in your letter, and thank you for forwarding that this afternoon, that a request for an extension of time from council to the proponent to the 17th of May to enable the proposal to be considered at the 15th of May council meeting was not granted. So we were basically asking for 2 more days.
That's right.
Now, normally planning applications are assessed in a timely manner so that they can be dealt with in council meetings. And my question is, perhaps the CEO can help out with this, was there something special about this that prevented it being assessed in a timely manner? Because I know our planning staff are stretched, but they usually prioritise things so that we do get them in time. And this was clearly something went amiss this time, because with 3 representations, it should have come to us to discuss. So normally it would be completed in time for that particular meeting. So that's my question.
Thank you. Chief Executive Officer.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the question. The reality of most of the DAs that are assessed and come before council is that they actually all have an extension of time. So the statutory period of 42 days is effectively allows for 2 council meetings, but that's right on that. So there's a timing issue in terms of when that DA is properly lodged. It then goes through an assessment process. It has to go through advertising and so forth. So the reality is that the number of DAs that require an extension of time is almost 100%. It's not entirely 100%. For those that need to come to council, for those that can be dealt with under delegation, it can be a little bit quicker. But for anything that triggers a referral to council, generally speaking, we will need to ask for an extension of time. And generally speaking, the majority of those are granted by the applicant.
Thank you, Councillor Warren. Are there any other questions at all on the weekly briefing reports? There being none, that brings us to the end of our omnibus items. Can I have a mover, please, the omnibus motion? Thank you, Councillor Hunter. Seconded, Councillor Chong. Thank you. All those in favour? And that's unanimous. Thank you. Moving now on to public question time. Public questions on notice, there are none. Answers to questions on notice. 5.3, answers to previous questions taken on notice. And moving on to item 5.4, questions on notice. Are there any questions from the... Oh, sorry, questions without notice. Are there any questions from the gallery? Mr Figg. And Mr Marsh, you'll be next. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As everybody sitting around here is a representative of the community, which I'm part of, Michael Figg, South Arm Road, Lauderdale.
Thank you.
I never forget. And how the council is a stickler for the rules. Can you tell me why council has 2 logos? Now, the logo on all of the vehicles is the sunrise over the water in the mountains, and the one on the carpet, on the building and on your flag and on your signs in here is the old logo. And also some of the correspondence we get is with the old logo. Can you just clarify which is your logo?
Mr Figg, thank you. Well, one's a logo, one's a shield, but I'll ask the CEO to actually give a legal answer as to why they are. And it's actually a policy that governs the use of those 2 different
Right, thank you.
brands, if you like.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the question. So I'll preface my comments to say I may well need to go and check the policy, but as I understand things, the shield is the formal crest of council, or the formal badge, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And the Rising Sun logo is effectively a brand that we use. Yeah.
A brand. Okay, now I know what a shield is. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Marsh, please.
Hello, I'm Victor Marsh from Belrive. I have a question, but also my wife can't make it tonight. Is there any chance I could ask her a question as well?
There is, Mr Marsh, yes.
It's only short.
Absolutely.
It's not scary. During the time that the public pier at Kangaroo Bay has been opened, it has required regular cleaning, maintenance and repairs to damage seats and signs caused by people fishing and vandals. Recently, a deliberately lit fire has severely damaged a seat and totally destroyed the jetty's navigational light. So my question is, what will the total cost to ratepayers be when all current repairs are completed?
Thank you, Mr Marsh. Do we have that information to hand, Mr Graham? We could take it on notice.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
But like you, Mr Marsh, we were all extraordinarily disappointed by that vandalism, and clearly it's a cost to ratepayers that is not appreciated by any of us.
Okay.
So Mrs Marsh's question.
Yes, it's very simple. Is it possible for the council to erect a sign saying beware of wildlife on Victoria Esplanade parallel to the old fort? There is a large family of paddy melons crossing the road at all times of the day, considering a percentage of drivers are not obeying the 40-kilometre speed limit.
Mr Marsh, I think it's a very good suggestion, and we'll take that on notice and come back to you. Yep, thank you very much. I'll come back to you and Mrs Marsh.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions without notice from the gallery? There being none, moving now on to item number 6, deputations by members of the public.
Sorry, I have a question.
Oh, Chief Executive Officer, a question? Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, I should have jumped to my feet a little bit earlier. We had a question today from Mr David Griggs of Risdon Vale. Mr Griggs asked, I'm asking Council to become more proactive with severe housing and rental crisis. I want Council to investigate and report on a differential rating model for properties that are converted into short-stay rental market as opposed to them being a normal rental property. For it to be cheaper rates for a rental property than Airbnb or short-stay rental property. The answer to that question is as follows. On the 20th of March 2023, Deputy Mayor Ritchie moved a successful motion that addresses this issue. On the back of that motion, we have written to the State Government and to the Local Government Association of Tasmania, and the issue is to be debated at the next Local Government Association of Tasmania General Meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There being no other questions without notice, we move now on to item number 6, deputations by members of the public. Chief Executive Officer.
Thank you. We have 2 deputations tonight. The first is from Mr Graham Soden in relation to 8 Lamb Place.
Thank you, Mr Soden, and just your name and address, please.
Thank you. Good evening. As stated, I'm Graham Soden. I'm the sole director of Ageing Well Proprietary Limited, the company that owns 8 Lamb Place. The development I'm proposing is infill to better utilise the property, as it is a large block, just over 1 acre, in the original light industrial area created by the Tasmanian Development Authority about 25 plus years ago. Prior to my purchase, the site was used largely as a storage site, as the previous owner not also ran a motor repairs business, but also a towing business. This is no longer the case, so the out-of-hours delivery of materials and drop-off of accident-damaged vehicles would be highly unlikely. Within the last 4 weeks, the lease to the site has been taken over by a new operator who is proving to be both competent and professional, and I have every confidence in his ability. I have reduced the height of the building by 0.5 metre to reduce the visual impact. This height is the minimum now that can be built to fully utilise the building for its intended use as an extension to the existing operation, i.e. motor body repairs. As can be seen by the shadow diagrams within all your minutes there is no overshadowing of any other structure whatsoever, and the construction will consist of solid concrete tilt panels which can be made more visually acceptable than a metal shed. I'm proposing a stage development with the workshop to the rear of the building being stage 1. Once this building is fully utilised, I will consider if stage 2 will be needed based on this, whether in fact stage 2 will proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Soden.
Thank you, Mayor. Our second deputation tonight is from Mr Andrew Lydon in respect to 2A Ringwood Road.
Thank you, Mr Lydon. Name and address, please.
Andrew Lydon, Director of Lydon Builders, and this regards to 2A Ringwood Road project. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about my project tonight. We're a local family business that employs about 60 people. I've lived at Lauderdale for 40 years myself, just as a bit of a background. We feel this development will be a significant contribution to the lifestyle on Lauderdale. We see it as, from our point of view, it's something that I would have liked to have had when my children are growing up. There's an area for children and there's quite a nice area for the adults as well. We've paid a great deal of attention into the design, the entire design, and so it suits and enhances the entrance to Lauderdale. So as you drive down Ringwood Road, it's got quite a pleasant appeal, and hopefully it'll complement Woolworths if that goes ahead or does not go ahead. I'm not sure what they're doing there, but the residential component offers sort of a high-class duplex type thing, which is unusual for the area, but it'll give people an opportunity to have a different sort of lifestyle, nearly like a semi-retirement lifestyle. I intend to put lifts in all the two-storey duplexes, so it'll appeal to, once it'll help me sell them, and two, it'll open the market up. It's a nice flat area. All the developments has got access via lifts. There's a nice big playground right in the centre, which is very important to me and my family. We did have a couple of representations that I saw on Facebook, and I contacted Councillor Bree Hunter about them. And since then, we have approached the Lauderdale Primary School and went up and spoke with them probably for over an hour as to what we could possibly do to mitigate them. And we have got some ideas that we're working on to mitigate any. But I just want to assure Council that personally I'll be making every effort possible to make sure that safety is of the highest priority for the children crossing the development. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr Lydon. Thanks very much. That's the end of our deputations. CEO, thank you. Colleagues, now move on to item number 7, Planning Authority matters, and I advise you that Council now intends to act as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. Moving on to item 7.1, which is a development application for 8 Lamb Place, Cambridge, to service industry, motor repairs and servicing, buildings and signage. I ask for a mover of this recommendation, please. Thank you, Councillor Kennedy. And a seconder. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to thank you for your deputation, Mr Sodden, and as per the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kennedy. Deputy Mayor.
Yes, likewise. Don't intend to speak particularly long this evening on this matter. I think it's pretty straightforward. Having looked at all of the report from council officers, I am very happy to support the development application and urge colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Mulder, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, the only issues with this, and they aren't, there's nothing we can do about it, is the planning scheme and the fact that we would have this light industrial area sandwiched up against the residential area and then you go a little bit further on, and then there is the real industrial and commercial area, which is built around Cambridge Park and all the development that's going on down there. And then for some reason in the middle of this residential thing, abutting it, we've got this light commercial development. Now, I know there's a sound attenuation wall, and I know there's a gap between that attenuation wall where the people who bought houses in that area, and they bought them after the zone, it's not like something that's been imposed on afterwards, and fully aware of the fact that this exists. The fact is that, you know, this should never have been in this area when there's a clearly defined area that is now being developed as commercial and industrial, and where we can't put any residential permits. But we have what we have. The sound attenuation wall is there, and as I raised with colleagues at the briefing the other day, you know, you've got a sound attenuation wall, you've got a 6 metre, which is 3.6 metres high, but then you've got a 6 metre building. And I'm not sure whether that building is now 5.5 or whether it's still 6 metres, but in any event, you have this building that is stuck up over the thing. Now, I know that's well within the planning scheme and all the requirements, but I just sort of wonder how we got ourselves into this position, and should it turn out that noise attenuation is not achieved, if there's anything we can do retrospectively to fix up this particular anomaly. But apart from that, I support it because I have to, and because of the history, and that bodies other than ours have decided that this is what this is going to be. And it's not for the first time that I will question the appropriateness of the zoning of development applications that we are looking at tonight. But on planning grounds, no, there's nothing we can do but encourage this use because it's an appropriate use, as we've heard in the deputation. It is also, you know, that they have taken steps to try to mitigate any potential problems, but it is a zone conflict. And I hope that as we move forward into other zones and into future planning schemes, that we try to avoid this issue of light industrial on the back doorsteps of residential properties.
Thank you, Councillor Moulder. Councillor Walker.
Yes, I probably should have tried to get up a little bit early, as a lot of what I was going to speak about has been covered. And to be honest, I'm largely touching on the same issue, but from a slightly different perspective. And the representative tonight pointed out 25 years of ownership. And if we rock on back to 1998, beyond that zone, you're looking at what was largely sort of open space paddocks. So the light industrial zone, if you like, has existed and been operating there prior to a lot of the general residential that's occurred. So the application's before us, and it meets all those schemes. It ticks the boxes, and I will be encouraging my colleagues to also vote for it. However, we are going to be sitting as a planning authority every 3 weeks for a while, one hopes. I guess what we need to bring from this is what is best practice as you go from one zone to another. It might be the case that we can look for other examples, but I think rationally going from industrial slap bang to general residential is just a conflict that is waiting for a development application to happen. So I'd like to know just going forward, and there won't be an answer tonight, but what is best practice, and also what are the other potential areas? Because I suspect if we revisited this 8 years ago, we might have identified it if we'd been looking and say, well, actually, maybe that section would work better as commercial. Maybe there would have been some buffer to smooth between it. And I don't have the answer now, but I'd like to, moving forward from this, look at where are the other potential problems like this that might come up, and should we be being proactive to look at something to go from light industrial to general residential? Because I think that butting up against each other is, with the best intention of the general residential users and earnestness of the light industrial application, it's natural that conflict will arise. So.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor James, do you want to?
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's interesting that the Tasmanian Development Authority was mentioned because going back in time, there was that discussion as to whether or not the actual general residential and the light industrial ought to be, hat and glove in sort of in the arrangement. But what I really want to talk about is the vehicular movement outside of prescribed operating hours, and that is going to be limited to occasional emergency low tow trucks dropping off damaged vehicles in need of repairs. And it also says the intensity of vehicular movement outside prescribed will be low. The occurrences are anticipated to be a maximum of 2 per month, and this is not expected to cause unreasonable loss of amenity to the residential area. My concern is, and I'm just raising this because a lot of this is left to the owner of the premises in order to be able to make sure that there's only limited or operating hours limited to occasional emergency vehicles. So the question here arises, and that's one of the performance criteria that's been addressed, is that however the occasional truck entering the site after hours is expected given the nature of the use, and this is not anticipated to result in loss of residential amenity through vehicular noise. So having said that, my question through you, Mr Mayor, to the acting city manager, city planning, is there any way in which council can monitor this sort of activity to make sure that those hours of operation and the limited number of emergency vehicles dropping off vehicles to the site is in fact kept, obviously, maintained? And is there any way in which council can monitor this through the council's planning authority, planning department, or is it dependent upon a member of the public putting forward, Mr Mayor, their concern if in fact some of these vehicles do actually breach the operating hours as being determined by this condition in the recommendation?
Thank you, Councillor Jones. We'll stop the clock, please. Ms Olsen, are you able to answer that, please?
Through you, Mayor, the permit would be enforced as we enforce all other permits at council.
Thank you, Ms Olsen. Councillor James, do you wish to contribute anything more? Okay, we'll reset the clock. Thank you. Any other colleagues wishing to make a contribution? There being none, Councillor Kennedy, right of reply.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just like to thank colleagues for their contribution, and once again, I seek your support.
Thank you very much. We have the recommendation moved by Councillor Kennedy, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving now on to item 7.2, development application for 39 Cambridge Road, Bellerive, with access via 2 Percy Street at 1 to 7 Clarence Street, Bellerive. Demolition and mixed-use building, 10 multiple dwellings and commercial space. Councillor James, do you...
So moved.
You wish to move? Thank you very much. And a seconder? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and it's very pleasing that at last we have some activity on this particular corner of Cambridge and Clarence Street. The interesting part about this is that there has been a building under construction, and it did meet the substantial commencement, as part of our planning scheme, and it's been dragged on over a number of years. One of the key aspects of that was, in its early stages, was car parking. And in this particular recommendation that's before us, it does refer, and I know a number of my colleagues are concerned, and they may speak to this in relation to the $120,000 on page 43, item 11, cash in lieu. A cash contribution of $120,000 and have to be provided in lieu of those number of car parking spaces that are deficient. Now, this does raise an issue, but we have dealt with other particular developments in that site, and it's very difficult, as we all know, to have that number of car parking spaces against a particular business development, which is in accordance with our planning scheme. So the number of car parking spaces that have been identified here are in accordance with our planning scheme. That is absolutely written into the planning scheme, in as much as that is the number of spaces that we need to have, as because it's deficient in that number, and council needs to be provided with $120,000, and that is going to be presumably in the longer term, and a number of us around the table want to see the multi-storey car park developed in that area, and there is an investigation underway by the department in this place as to what is the viability of that and so on. So in this particular case, I suggest that we need to keep in mind the provisions of the planning scheme, and that this particular condition has to be adhered to, because in the longer term it's going to be that monies obviously will be put, and I believe it's the case, into some development which may in take a lot of the pressures off our planning scheme in relation to new developments in that particular area. I seek council support.
Thank you, Councillor James. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Ritchie.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't seek to add anything significantly to what Councillor James has already said. I think we'd all agree that it's really important that we see something going on this site. I've given it very careful consideration after having looked at that site for many, many years, and indeed wasn't particularly impressed with some of the other buildings that have been built just further along the road on Clarence Street that we see there now. But what we're seeing this evening is, in my view, a much more acceptable proposal, and for that reason, and considering all of the information provided by the officers very diligently, covering a lot of the areas of concern, given the different effect that this one will have in relation to residential people living on the other side of the road, which is a nil impact, I'm very happy to support it on that basis.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Walker, and then Councillor Warren.
Like we all know, we are sitting as a planning authority. We judge this with the planning scheme that is before us, and there are circumstances that can't be brought into it. I did move a motion around dereliction or derelict buildings in the last term of council, and I think that and that was around a higher rate levy on buildings that meet a certain criteria, and I used that around largely the scheme in place in Ireland. So I'm not going to make any specific attributations to a specific building, but what I can say is this is a situation where we're judging a new and much improved plan from what came before council a long time ago. What's good about this in particular, I think, is the opportunity for hopefully for residents to age in place, to be able to downsize and live within their community that they may have resided in for quite some time. And that is a particular challenge that is often but often seen in a lot of areas of Clarence, where there's small amounts of flat area and lots of sloped area. So I think that is a good thing. I think it is it can be classified as smart fill rather than dumb fill if you think about where it's located, if you think about the fact that it's not really conflicting on a height basis with some of the neighbouring buildings. And I'd like to see greater density in certain pockets close to right in the heart of service centres, rather than the dumb fill approach where we're seeing in some of the general residential areas where we're just down to the last metre squared, people are squeezing in as much as they can onto blocks that aren't necessarily designed for it. The issue of car spaces is raised, and for members of the community that might be listening and wondering what this is about, for a long time, well preceding me on council, there has been contributions required for shortfalls in commercial car parks. So a building is with a commercial element is designated to going to be an activity that generates the requirement of a certain number of car parks. So the number here has been identified as 10, and that's where the 120,000 comes from. And this is a system that's been in place for a long time, and I think people sometimes come and think, well, couldn't you waive it in this instance? And no, I would suggest that is manifestly unfair. I would suggest that would smack of corporatism or potential cronyism, where one development is getting a leg up that other developments didn't have. I would suggest that in some regards the the result with the Boulevard development was disappointing because a motion for that building, which had a lot of commercial car parking demand, I believe required greater car parking spaces. But in this development, it's not being contested, and it is equitable with what has been burdened on other businesses in the area, and that is a good outcome, as is the densification in this setting. So I seek colleagues' support.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Warren, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This site on the corner of Clarence Street and Cambridge Road has to be one of the most hated sites in the area, I think, and we've long had calls for something to be done. And I think the danger in that case is it's dangerous to fall into the trap of doing something rather than leaving it at blank, and we certainly heard that in Kangaroo Bay, that people were saying, you've got to build something, we don't care how awful it is, just don't leave it blank. So I'm pleased to say that this is a reasonable development. I'm quite happy to support it. It's the sort of thing that, as mentioned by colleagues, that I'd like to see in Bellerive. There's a great opportunity for 2 or 3 storey developments there above existing shops, close to transport. We've got buses and ferries on the doorstep. The development makes provision for bicycles. It's important to note that there are car spaces available for the residents. I presume it's 1 per apartment, but it's the commercial premises where we don't have the car parks, and it's quite reasonable to expect that there's a contribution to providing greater parking behind the development. And this actually calls to mind part of the ill-fated proposal for Skylands, where there were commercial centres where the buildings are around the street and hidden behind are the cars. So we have the opportunity to do that here. I know a couple of colleagues supported that. So yes, I'm pleased to support this, and I think it's a model for what we could be doing and could be doing well in an area close to services that allows people to age in place without destroying amenity for neighbours.
Thank you, Councillor Warren. Councillor Mulder.
I must have misread the report. I thought it said the zone was general business. All the debate today has been about how it's inter-residential with the intensification of residential properties. Get no mistake, this is predominantly, as we will hear several times this evening, a residential fitting with a, quote, commercial aspect on the ground floor. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that it's the way our zones are working. And the reference to Skyline was very interesting. You know, they're going to have 6 commercial zones, and this type of development shows us how they will be used. We will have a ground floor with maybe a coffee shop, if you're lucky, if you can find someone who can do it, who's prepared to put in a coffee shop to service such a small catchment, but it becomes a front for building up a residential area. I'm not saying I'm opposed to that, because that is the most appropriate space. You know, how many times have we heard of the dead city hearts that just collapse at 5 p.m. because everyone's gone off to the suburbs, where it actually creates a vibrant inner community. And in this particular case, we've already approved, several years ago when I was on council in my first couple of terms, the development that is immediately above it. And this is exactly the same as that development, and then therefore you can't really argue about it being not suitable to the amenity of the area. Might I say, the perspective of this thing is a damn sight better looking than the one that it's above, so it can only enhance the scheme. And so I'm very supportive of it. But if we're going to have these sorts of things, then why don't we just zone them in a residential and require that at streetscape there be some business zone, and in that way we would avoid, when greenfields development like Skylands happened, that we use that as an excuse to increase the densification of housing in a zone that otherwise wouldn't allow it. Yes, I welcome this development. I think it's a good development, and I would certainly wish the professional officers on the ground floor a successful tenancy, because it would be a shame to see, as I suspect will happen in other areas when we do this, that those ground floors will become just open spaces because they're technically zoned this, but no business sees fit to operate in them. But anyway, I will support this particular application, and I will support any application that does those sorts of things, that actually gets rid of these vacant blocks. In terms of the derelict buildings registration, can I say that there's another few around the place that are also in this particular position, but whatever we do, it's not our job to tell people that they have to do something on their land. And that's the big problem with this sort of stuff. It's got to wait for time. I'll make the point too, and this relates also to the Kangaroo Bay development. My greatest concern is that, by and large, the idea of a central business district in these areas is just not commercially viable. The only thing that's driving these things is the residential component, which may make some commercial operation viable. But just to have a commercial district, I think, is rapidly becoming not a viable proposition. So, therefore, I'll be supporting this application.
Thank you, Councillor Mulder. Any other colleagues wishing to make a contribution? There being none, Councillor James, try to reply, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'll be brief and thank colleagues for their input in relation to this. I did fail to mention one of the key things that I'm proud of, and I know that we have been seeking more of the public art elements in the city, and condition number on page 42 refers to, amongst other things, the approved public art elements must be completed and installed to the satisfaction of the council's manager sitting planning prior to the issue of a certificate of completion. And that
Councillor James, as you know, as you will know, this introduction of new material that hasn't actually been previously raised. You don't have that opportunity to write a reply, but thank you for pointing it out. But I'll ask that you stick, please, to what you're allowed to talk about in your right of reply.
Okay.
Good try, though.
Still part of the motion. Anyway, so it's still part of the motion, and so having said that, I seek council support.
Thank you, Councillor James. All right. The motion before the chair is that the DA be approved, subject to the following conditions and advice. Moved by Councillor James, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Congratulations. Moving now on to item 7.3, development application for 138 Frederick Henry Parade, Cremorne, change of use to short-term accommodation. I'll call for a mover of this motion or the recommendation, please. Thank you. Councillor Walker actually beat you to the punch there, Councillor Mulder. I'll take you at the seconder. Thank you. Councillor Walker.
It's before us. You can read the report as to why it's recommended for approval, and I suggest we follow those recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Mulder.
Thank you. This short-term accommodation, as with the Uber taxi drivers and all the other bits and pieces of the so-called gig economy, and afterwards someone can tell me why it's called gig, but I'm sure there's a reason. We, as a community, have serially failed to come to grips with this gig economy and its impact upon our lifestyle and the way things work. I'm not opposed to renting out a few rooms and stuff, but when you get a residential house turned into a business operation, as we heard tonight in some of the deputations and the questions that were being asked, really it's about time we got our act together and sorted out what it is in the planning scheme that allows a commercial operation to operate in a residential zone. Because that's what they are, with all the impacts that they have on the community. However, we haven't done that. We've sat on our hands and we've let this thing roll on and on and on again, as we heard tonight in a question in relation to the weekly briefing reports that Councillor James raised. And we go on and on and on. And there was a motion that we all passed by the Deputy Mayor early on in the piece, and yet it just lumbers on. Dare I say, might I suggest that someone in the government is being perhaps bloody-minded and a dinosaur when it comes to this?
Councillor Mulder. Councillor Hume. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, it's interesting actually. The gig economy, I remember, used to, when it was first starting up, used to be called the sharing economy, because it used to be, the concept behind it used to be that you have a house, for example, when it comes to visit accommodation, you share some rooms but primarily live in it, or, you know, when you're an Uber driver, you use your car for your regular business as your personal vehicle, but share it, you know, as a commercial driver. And now it's, you know, got to a stage where, you know, the entire houses or entire cars are being used all the time for these businesses. But the reason why this kind of use is being approved for residential areas, I would suggest, is because visitor accommodation of this sort really has a residential sort of aspect to it. I mean, you know, as it points out in the reports, when people raise issues about you know, noise and vehicle movements and so on, it's pointed out by planning officers that there is a cap on the number of people who can stay in these short stay accommodations, and that it basically has a residential character to it because of that, because they basically stay in it short term as if they're, you know, living in a house but on holiday, not their own house. If we're going to address this sort of thing and have less of these applications, then we've got a booming tourism industry, which is great for the state and great for our economy. We need accommodation to meet this demand, and the solution is more formal accommodation, I would suggest, if we're going to have less of these proposals. Yeah, let's have that. But I think in terms of amenity impacts, because of the residential character of people staying in a house on holiday, I don't think it actually has that much of an impact on the neighbourhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hume. Anyone else? Councillor Warren, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As Councillor Walker so eloquently said, meets the planning scheme, therefore we have to approve it. But I can't let this go without adding my concern that short stay accommodation is damaging our community and impacting on our rental market, and the only people who would seem to disagree with that are owners of Airbnbs or people who are not trying to rent. I noticed that this was approved. I voted against the approval of this when it was came before us a couple of years ago. It is an unusual development in this area. It's 4 conjoined residences in an area that's primarily standalone houses. My knowledge of the planning scheme relating to Airbnb, short stay accommodation is the term I'm looking for, is a bit hazy. But I think that if the residence is not more than 3 bedrooms, then you can do a self-assessment. So it doesn't go through any rigorous process. So that means things like smoke alarms, fire escapes, this is a 2-storey property, are not assessed in any formal way. So being a conjoined property, that does add an element of risk. At the time that this was approved, I also raised concerns about the likelihood of erosion of the sand dunes, with 4 residents fronting onto the sand dunes, even though there's an approved path to the side that residents were encouraged to use. I've seen photos today of a significant amount of vegetation in front of the property, so you'd have to really want a scrub bash to get through there. But I still think that with a fast turnover of guests, that's still something that would cause me a little bit of concern, because there's not a lot of dune left between the beach and these properties. So it is in a fairly fragile state. So I just make those comments. I don't like it. I can't vote against it.
Thank you, Councillor Warren. Anyone else wish to make a contribution? Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Here we are again. And it's always interesting to hear the commentary. Some people saying we desperately need more accommodation. Airbnb, short stay accommodation is a good thing. We need it in our community. Other people feel that it's ruining our local communities. I think the answer is actually both. And that's part of the problem, is that we don't have the sufficient tools to be able to regulate appropriately in this space. That's why I successfully moved the motion here with the support of colleagues to ask government to start to seriously look at this issue. It's not something that we can do. This is why we get up here meeting after meeting saying we reluctantly have no choice. We need to support this for one reason or another. I'd like to see some of those regulatory issues addressed. Obviously, that's the point of the motion. We hope that it will get support through the Local Government Association in their deliberations. This is not going to go away. There needs to be some fairness injected into this debate. I really hope that government's going to start listening, because without that input, then we will just continue to go round and round. You know, I note that in one of the recent reports we received around those items that were approved by delegation, a quarter of those were short stay accommodation approvals that we don't see, you know, and then that doesn't begin to look at the ones that don't even come through council at all, completely unregulated. So there's a whole lot of things going on in the community that we can't keep a track on or a tab on. So there's a lot of good reasons that this needs to be reviewed at state government level. So I'll be supporting the motion like everybody else, and for the same reasons as everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and again, I will not be supporting this recommendation, and for the following reasons, and they are: our planning scheme does give us some wriggle room, and it depends on the extent to which one assesses that. And as elected representative, I believe that this is a change of use to what was originally proposed in 15th of February 2019, and at that time council refused that particular development because it was a very neighbourly concern in relation to that, and it was overturned by the Resource Planning and Management and Planning Appeal Tribunal on that date. But in this particular case, on page 103, under a low density residential zone, there is a change here, and that is why we are going through the assessment process to determine as to whether or not visitor accommodation ticks the boxes as part of 10.3.2 P1. And P1 says visitor accommodation must be compatible with the character and use of the area and not cause any unreasonable loss. This term unreasonable crops up time and time again. And that is really what is the benchmark in a lot of these decisions that basically go the way of, the approval process in this particular case. But Part A, under that P1, the privacy of adjoining properties. Now, what I believe is inappropriate here is that the proposal is for the change of use of an existing residential apartment to visitor accommodation. So therefore, it comes to council. There's been 2 representations, so therefore it meets within the 42 guidelines. This one does. And therefore, we are looking at this. But what's important, and that's why I'm going to vote against this, is, and it says, and I quote, the proposal is for the change of use of an existing residential apartment to a visitor accommodation with no physical alterations proposed, that's okay, to the existing building. Therefore, there will be no change to the current privacy levels for the adjoining properties. So you currently have 4 multi-storey apartments, and 3 of which are stratum. This one obviously is stratum as well because the 4 of them are on that basis. But there is a privacy here, and obviously there's going to be people coming and going, and it's going to impact, in my view, on the other residents and other dwellers in that particular case. And on page 104 it says that the applicant also confirmed that the apartment would host no more than 6 guests at any time. At any time. So you would have, presumably, you could have 6, and they will be in one section of this apartment block, and there is, I believe, an impact of privacy that could be argued that is contrary to the planning scheme because that has been identified as one of the acceptable solutions. I am basically against this on the basis that it's a part of a 4 apartment building block, 3 of which are normal residential dwellings, people undertaking their normal day of life, and this particular one is open slather, although there's only a maximum of 6 that can be there used at one time. So I believe that it's appropriate to look at P1 of the acceptable solutions, and in my opinion that it will cause unnecessary disturbance and displace the overall residential function of the other 3 apartments.
Thank you, Councillor James. Councillor Goyne, please.
I wasn't planning on talking because it takes me a while to get to my feet, but I just wanted to...
You can stay seated.
You know? That's okay. I'm up now. I just wanted to contribute that in my personal experience with an Airbnb in our residence, the guests come late, leave early, make very little noise, do not impact. None of the guests we've had have impacted, and probably have a lot less people than what we would as residents of a property. And as I'm sure we all know, there isn't a cap on how many guests I can have in my personal dwelling. So I would suggest that in my experience it's usually much less impact, and the guests usually are trying to keep to themselves and a lot less likely to sticky beak than my ordinary neighbours. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goyne. Any other colleagues wish to make a contribution at all? Councillor Walker, right of reply, please.
Yes, thank you. What is the sharing economy? I think that's a glorified word for the Venezuelan economy or socialism. So, yeah, no wonder they killed that term. What is the gig economy? Well, that is the labour market characterised by the prevalence of short-term contracts or freelance work as opposed to permanent jobs. There we go to the question on the gig economy. Now, one of the things I'd make is I don't think I was quite as authoritarian as to cajole my colleagues to say you must vote for this. You have free will. You're sitting as a member of a planning authority. What I can say is that if you think that there are serious grounds on which a refusal can be made, draft up a refusal. I'm not aware of any refusal being drafted. I'm not aware of any refusal being whispered. So that's the way, and I'm not aware that it happened, and I think that residents out there should be aware that that's how it's happened, and that nothing on that basis was, to my knowledge, happening at this council. Governments, and this includes local governments, can't legislate outcomes. We can't legislate intentions. The best that governments can do is put in legislation around incentives, and the incentives are all in place for this style of development. Now, I'm not here to talk about whether that's a social good or not, and there was some discussion about that around the table. But if you're not approving hotels in an area, and there's a drastic shortage, and there's a desirability to stay in an area, and there's a tax system that incentivises this style of entrepreneurship, don't be surprised that it happens. So we sit as the planning authority. You can vote how you believe is appropriate in this instance, though should this be unsuccessful, I'm not sure what's going to be drafted in what effect as an alternate. But that is something that sits with each councillor as they've read this report. And as I say, the officers have given the grounds under the scheme why it should be recommended, and that is the reason why I moved the motion, and that is the reason why I believe it is appropriate as a planning authority, which is how we are to judge this, that we vote tonight. Vote as you wish.
Councillor Walker, thank you. Colleagues, the development application for change of use to short-term accommodation at 138 Frederick Henry Parade, Cremorne, be approved subject to the following conditions and advice. Is a motion for the Chair. All those in favour? Against? So carried. Thank you. Moving now on to item 7.4, which is a development application for 2A Ringwood Road, Lauderdale, and 450 South Arm Road, Lauderdale, for 13 multiple dwellings, 9 visitor accommodation units, offices, Pilates studio and brewery and cafe. I call for a mover. Councillor Hunter, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Mullen.
And she didn't leave her seat.
Oh, she's the first one I saw. Thank you, Councillor Mullen. But you didn't catch my to be second. Thank you. So, Councillor Hunter, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to support this development. I first became aware of this when a community member contacted me with concerns. They were particularly concerned about the traffic report that had been done and didn't really consider the movement of pedestrians and cyclists related to the school traffic. There was a bit of Facebook commentary going on a local Facebook page, and I'd contacted the senior planner. However, before I even got any further with it, the developer, Mr. Lydon, reached out to me because he had seen the comments and the concern and was very keen to find solutions to those concerns. So we facilitated a meeting with the Lauderdale Primary School and the President of the School Association to talk about some potential solutions about pedestrian access to and from the school. And Mr. Lydon was very obliging, and he's very passionate about safety of pedestrians and cyclists, so thank you. And he is willing to establish a pedestrian shared use pathway on the eastern right-of-way of his development, pending that the neighbours are also willing to do the same. And he is furthering conversations with that owner and are happy to continue working with the school and nearby residents. I think this proposal is quite desirable for not only Lauderdale but the South Arm Peninsula, Acton, Oak Downs and further afield. It's something that the area is currently lacking of this type of business and community space. It's in keeping with the Lauderdale Neighbourhood Specific Area Plan, and I encourage my colleagues to support the development.
Thank you, Councillor Hunter. Councillor Mullen, your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will support this development. I do think it's an appropriate area. I think it's a really good use of this land. I do think we need as many residents as we can get in this particular area. And it then raises the question, if we can have this sort of development with this many houses, with this much runoff, in this particular area, when neighbouring properties, you know, the Haldanes, the Figs, the Durises, the Lambracuses and all those other people who have property right next to this on the same flat area with the same inundation issues, but they're not allowed to build anything because it's in a flood-prone area, and we are faffing around, that's the only way to put it, with drainage issues that could be solved, that developers have said they can dissolve. Yet how do we talk to these people and say, look, we think this is a wonderful development, and it is. So how do we tell the people in the neighbouring properties that we love this particular building, but we can't support you next door because you happen to be zoned rural residential and not general business? So, you know, it's this is the problem with a planning scheme that arbitrarily says you can or you can't and you do something else. And then, but instead of a planning scheme that says when you fix the infrastructure, when you fix the stormwater, because that's about the only thing we've got control of now, you can then build houses in these areas. So, and this is the problem with the planning scheme, which is built upon someone drawing lines on a map saying where you can and cannot build. And then those lines on the map, of course, will eventually, there will be people either side of it who say, hang on a minute, I've got the same topography, I've got the same drainage issues. Why can't I build the much needed residences for this community? Of course I'll support this. It's a great development. But my heart goes out to all those other people in the neighbouring areas. And Mr Mayor, you've been part of trying to resolve this issue, and yet we get knocked back because we are a mere planning authority. It's our job to just apply the rules, and if we get them wrong, we get a big smack. What about if they've got them wrong? How about some accountability back to the planners, to the people, to the minister who signed the planning scheme, which we are obliged to enforce, you know, and we won't go back to the abuse we get when we do. But how about some responsibility back to these people to say, you can't be drawing lines on the map and then asking us to change them to suit this developer or that developer. Let's get serious about this stuff. Let's do our job of putting the infrastructure in place and then call on the minister who signs this planning scheme. This is not a planning scheme that is signed by the Clarence City Council. It bears the minister's signature. It's our job just to enforce it and to take the political heat when it produces results that the public don't like or that the government doesn't want to take accountability for. So I'm all for this development, but for heaven's sake, how about a bit of equity, a bit of fairness, and how about us doing our job and actually draining these areas so that other people can put houses on them?
Thank you, Councillor Mulder. Councillor Kennedy, thank you. And just to the public gallery, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'd like to thank Councillor Mulder for his very passionate words there, and you know, we all share your pain and we're dealing with the matter in front of us. But I'd just like to take this moment to put on record and to thank Councillor Hunter and the proponent for actually doing what we would love to see more of happen, where we can bring a situation together, resolve it, walk away with a great outcome, and I would love to see so much more of that happening in this chamber. So thank you, and you have my support.
Thank you, Councillor Kennedy. Councillor, you may from your seat if you prefer. Councillor Goyne, you have the floor.
I just wanted to
We
reiterate.
don't have hot towels.
I just wanted to reiterate what has been said and thank Councillor Hunter very much and London Builders for preparing to work with the community that I was born and raised in, and just want to call on the fact that we continue to address these issues before they become issues like we've discussed, and asking for, you know, some more clarification on planning matters so that the other, as Councillor Mulder has mentioned, the other landowners can possibly put in as developments that are as beneficial to the community, whilst hoping that the state government improves the roads into and out of the areas to ensure that there is safe passage for the residents, so that we don't necessarily have to facilitate pathways that there should already be there. So thank you very much, and I hope everyone supports this.
Thank you, Councillor Goyne. Councillor James.
Thank you. I wasn't going to speak to this particular matter because I thought it's fairly straightforward, and I will be supporting it. But I will be supporting it on the basis of what's in the Council's report. The Council report deals with two sides of the argument, in my opinion. The proponent, and we're not going to mention names because I don't think that's appropriate, and also the representatives. And any DA or any particular development such as this that comes to Council's consideration, we have to look at it in accordance with section 6.1, and that's determining any application must, in addition to the matters required under 51.2, take into consideration all applicable standards, any representations in relation to it. Now, there were four representations, and they were on a mix: traffic, pedestrian safety, use and arrangement of right-of-way. Having said that, the officers have actually spelled out in format in relation to the development on its merits not on one side of the argument or the other. And that's very important in my opinion. Having said that, I believe it's an appropriate development. I did support further development in Lauderdale, and I was one of the numbers that actually, no, we didn't quite have the numbers, I think, at the time. I know, Mr Mayor, you voted with us, and it was appropriate that we open that area up. So this is the first step, which is great. But whenever you're looking at a development application, you should be looking at the merits of it and the planning scheme. And if there's any deviation from that, well, that is a matter that the tribunal may need to determine. That is the issue that's before us, Mr Mayor, and that is how I'm going to vote. Not on any argument, whether it's for the proponent or on the side of the representations. I've weighed it up, and in this particular case, I believe it's appropriate development, and I will vote accordingly.
Thank you, Councillor James. Councillor Chong?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just very briefly, I will be supporting this development. I think it's a really good development and certainly in its place. One of the things I particularly like, which hasn't really been mentioned before, is not only is there the private open space, but the provision of the oval and the small vertical gardens, which I think lend a very green feel to this whole development and stop it being just a collection of random buildings put together. And I think that will make it a much nicer place to live.
Thank you, Councillor Chong. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Ritchie.
Also, very briefly, isn't it lovely to be able to come to the chamber with the situation described by Councillor Hunter, where we're able to work together, contact the proponent after having also had contact with people raising concerns. It's lovely to be able to come here, as Councillor Kennedy has said, and to be able to draw together all the parties that have an interest in a particular proposal and see those issues work through for the betterment of the proposal. And that can only be a great thing for the proponent and for the community and all those people that have an interest in the developments that are happening in their local community. Councillor Goyen's absolutely spot on that we need to be continuing to look at the traffic issues in that area. They're not going to go away, and in fact, you know, they're going to exacerbate as development continues to grow in these areas. So again, we need to be mindful of that and ask our state government colleagues to work with us on that. And I also understand the issues being raised by Councillor Mulder. They're very valid as well. Not something that we're going to be addressing here tonight. We've just got to deal with this particular project as it's before us, which is a very good development proposal, and I've got a lot of pleasure in supporting it, and I've appreciated the representations being made, and I'm encouraging colleagues to do likewise. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other colleagues wishing to make a contribution? Councillor Walker.
Thank you. So, look, the previous council, I'm sure prior to that, Mr Mayor, Councillor Mulder has raised the concept of the stop clock, where you could get people to, you could put a pause on the timeline for people to work things out. And it has been raised, but it obviously hasn't got further up the chain. So whether there is this way that's almost sort of happened through serendipity of a informal workaround, maybe there's a way where development applications are submitted and they can be asked, look, it's not part of the process, but should we get a representation? Would you like to be informed of it? And the person making the representation might be said, would you like the developer to be informed about it to see whether something could be worked out sooner? Then maybe there's a way to pre-solve these things than the current system, which fortunately hasn't occurred in this case, but in future, what have we often seen, which is it starts only at mediation post the whole process. So something to think about. The churlish point on this is I'm no fan of Pilates studios, but if every Pilates studio was accompanied by a brewery, then wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? Look, were this 3 metres higher up the hill, I would have zero qualms at all. Zero qualms at all. I'd be just straight ahead and ticking the box saying go. And we look at the development and we think that once built, it is going to be probably a good demonstration site of a smart use of multi-purpose use of land and best practice in what community building can look like. So I think that's a good thing. My qualms with this process all come down largely to page 133, and that is the criteria around stormwater. Can I get a definition of what tolerable risk is?
Thank you. Stop the clock, please, Ms Ellis. Mr Graham, are you able to, or Ms Olsen, are you able to answer that tolerable risk definition of that, please?
You look at the top bit, for example, it's mentioned multiple times, even in the first one. The applicant proposed buildings and works within the coastal wind adjacent area are assessed as having a tolerable risk.
With my chin, is that acceptable risk? Mr Graham?
Through Mr Mayor, no, it's related to the performance requirement in the planning scheme. So right at the moment, I can't actually give an answer to that. I would need to take time to provide that to council. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr Graham. Councillor Walker suggests we can do it.
Yeah, well, so I'm not sure exactly what I'm tolerating as far as the risk goes. I know that it's sort of, we see it in the context of a 1% annual exceedance of probability of coastal inundation. So that, as I said, that is the concern about developments in an area which eminently, from a global map, makes absolute sense when you look at where it is within other things. So that, I guess, is something that needs to be needs to be thought of. I'm going to have to base this on trust that the engineers have looked at the stormwater ramifications, and that we're not on the hook, should things not work out in this space. It is recommended for approval, and I very much approve of the design. I wish I weren't having to work in the space of trust, not being specifically right on with what tolerable risk is defined as in this case, but on the basis before us, I will be voting in favour of it.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Any other colleagues wishing to make a contribution? There being none, Councillor Hunter, you right to reply, please. And you can now talk about Pilates and breweries as well. So.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I won't talk about those things. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions. First of all, Councillor Mulder, in regards to flood mapping, if you look at the Clarence flood map, this property is actually outside of that. However, if it was suspect to flood, then I might reconsider supporting this development. But in this instance, I'm happy to, because it is outside of that. In regards to Councillor James' comments about making decisions based on merits in the planning scheme, I'm very much supporting this based on that, as it's recommended by council officers. And I support Councillor Walker's suggestion for having some sort of process to put planning applications on hold if possible, to facilitate more conversations like this if there's been concerns raised from the community. Maybe that's something we can pursue, perhaps not, I'm not sure. Thank you everyone for your contributions, and I seek your support.
Thank you, Councillor Hunter. Well, colleagues, we have before us the motion to approve the development application for 13 multiple dwellings, 9 visitor accommodation units, offices, Pilates and brewery and cafe at 2A Ringwood Road, Lauderdale, at 450 South Arm Road, Lauderdale, and that be approved subject to to conditions and advice. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Council now concludes its deliberations as a planning authority. We move now on to item 8, reports of officers. And I note that there's nothing for 8.1, 8.2 or 8.3. Move on to 8.4.1, governance, which is the appointment of councillors to council special committees. And there's a recommendation before us, which has been moved by the Deputy Mayor. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Chong. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank council staff for all the hard work that's gone into getting this proposal to Council this evening. I'm really looking forward to delving into the new committee structure, seeing how it works, what we take out of it, and what may need tweaking as we go through. That's one of the beauties of implementing a new system. We hope it's going to yield us better results, more opportunities. As I've said previously, this is not necessarily about less committees, subcommittees, or whatever we want to call them. It's about trying to make them work better, more streamlined. So I'm really, really excited about the opportunity to see how this new structure is going to work. And I also would like to thank my colleagues for all the work that they've done in working with one another to try and support people to get into those slots of on committees and subcommittees that were in areas of their interest. I think that we've all of us have gone about that in a very collegial and supportive way, and people being prepared to make way for others and withdraw to avoid ballots and all of those sorts of things is very heartening to see. And so I'm really looking forward to getting into the committee work, and I seek the support of colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Chong.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I echo Councillor Ritchie's comments that this is the culmination, if you like, of quite a long process, setting out the structure and operations and the constitutions of the various committees. And I think all of us are looking forward to getting these committees up and running and getting community members back engaged in the business of what we want to be doing with these committees. And I seek my colleagues' support.
Thank you, Councillor Chong. Any other comments? Councillor James.
Yes, I deliberately made myself available for the tracks and trails on the basis that I felt that there's still a lot of work to be done there, and it's necessary to be able to have that continue, even though it won't be actually a standing committee other than a working group. And it may be difficult to actually work through that particular special committee, to try to get some action when you're competing with other committees within that special committee group. So in essence, we have, I've just quickly added these up, and this stands about 11 committees if you're just using the advisory/committee standing working group heading. So really we haven't gone too far back as what I had proposed some time ago, that we have too many committees, and we really need to make sure that if we have committees, then we have the mere bones of that to be able to get things done. And as I mentioned at the last meeting, I have some reservations about this. I know there has been a lot of work put into it, and we've had workshops ad nauseum in relation to this. But I cannot see how a small working group, as distinct from one of the advisory group, is able to probably have some impact upon the council as part of what we did have in the past. And I'm just selecting the tracks and trails here because it's one of the key groups that really has put Clarence right up in lights, and it's very well recognised throughout Tasmania as part of Clarence's idyllic situation on its walking tracks and foreshore trails. I am reluctant to think that we're going to create another bureaucracy within the system. I have been in favour of about half a dozen of these, and then you could have really got more funding from those specific groups, as distinct from having a lot of groups trying to seek funds. And of course, in addition to these, you have the other recognised committees, which are obviously the Richmond Advisory Committee. So that's another committee which hasn't been identified within this particular application or recommendation. And then you have the Bell River Arts Committee. There's another one. So and so on and so forth. So if you just add those together, you've got another 15 all up. So really we're back to pretty much, I forgot the Geilston Bay Musk Huts, that's another committee that's standing, and so on. So you've all these committees that we really, what we tried to achieve in the first instance was to reduce it. And I cannot see, and I'm really hopeful because a lot of the new members in this place are on these committees and they have their membership to the degree that they are taking on a lot of workload, as distinct from some of us who have been there, done that, and could be relied upon for advice if that was the case. So I know the majority are in favour of it. I might abstain because I think we have really reinvented the wheel and we could have done a lot better in coming down to a few key groups that would have had some clout, as distinct from the working groups, which I don't think will have a lot of influence on the final decision-making process.
All right, any other contributors? Thank you, Councillor Hume.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to point out for Councillor James's benefit, he appears to be debating the structure of the committees. We've already approved the structure of the committees, so I wouldn't understand why he would abstain from the motion on the basis of objecting to the structure. What we're actually talking about, we're actually talking about the membership of the committees. Right?
So, excuse me one moment, Mr Councillor Hume. Is there a point of order, Councillor Jones?
Well, yes, what's in front of us is Council approves the following schedule of nominations for the new committees.
Councillor James, there's no point of order, and Councillor Hume, like you, is entitled to his view. No matter how distasteful you may find his view, he's entitled to his view, and he's putting his view, so please do not interrupt. Councillor Hume.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As I was pointing out, we're talking about the membership of the committees, not the structure of the committees. So I don't see why one would abstain from the motion or vote against the motion on the basis of disagreeing
Point of order, Mr Mayor. He's still talking about my contribution.
Councillor Jones, I've dealt with this. There is no point of order, and he's quite entitled to express his view on contributions that have been made in this chamber. Councillor James, no point of order. Councillor Hume, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So I've made that point. I just want to also echo what the Deputy Mayor said about the collegiality of this process. I love a process where the number of nominations matches the number of positions, don't we all? Yep. And I'd also like to thank a couple of colleagues who withdrew from a committee that I had a particular interest in and allowed me the opportunity to serve on that committee. And it resulted in a situation where everybody who wanted to serve on a committee got a Guernsey, and there's also a fairly good, I think, distribution of workload and portfolios between us. Thank you to colleagues for the collegial way in which we've approached coming to this decision.
Thank you, Councillor Hume. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, look, I'll be quick. There's a little bit of overlap on a Venn diagram, I suspect, Mr Mayor, between me and Alderman James on the issue of the committees, and I also didn't support the structure as Council voted on last time. This is what has been approved. I think we do have to, whilst noting the high level of work that was done, and I don't fault the calibre of the work. I still fault where we've arrived at, and I think it is interesting when we compare us with Hobart City, and for basically right up until this term of council, I described Hobart as a horse and buggy committee system. It really was quaint, and yet they've gone 21st century in how they've approached the committee process this term, and I'll be really interested with that laboratory of democracy mindset to see how they fare at the end of their term versus how we do, and it may well be the case that this is the best way forward. I'm not sure it is. I think there's still siloing. I still think it's problematic. I think you could make a case that there's a maldistribution of workload. That's life. So this is what's before us, and I don't know whether I will be voting in favour of it because on the sheer basis of the feeling of the structure. But if that upsets some of my colleagues, then I'll be doing it on the basis of maldistribution. So pick your point.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Anyone else wish to make a contribution? There being none, Councillor Ritchie, right of reply, please.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I thank colleagues for their contributions. Like Councillor Chong, I'm really looking forward to being able to make my contribution to those committees that I'll be involved in to the best of my ability, and to re-engaging the community, as you mentioned. That's a really important part of what these committees are all about. I don't feel the need to go over the points that those colleagues who might have some issues, as in it wasn't the preferred structure, that's already been dealt with, as Councillor Hume's already indicated, so don't have any intention of going over those grounds, but certainly it will be, the pudding will be in the eating. And of course, these are things that we should be, we should and will be monitoring how we perform through these new processes as is appropriate. And I thank colleagues for their support.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Colleagues, the motion before us is that we approve or endorse the appointments as listed for new special advisory committees and standing work groups, and also endorse Councillor Chong's appointment to Cycling South. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Abstentions? The motion is carried. Thank you. Moving now, thank you, Councillor Mulder, to item 9, motions on notice. 9.1, notice of motion seeing in the name of the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Ritchie. Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Is there a second to Councillor Ritchie?
Sorry.
Councillor Goyne, thank you.
I've jumped the gun.
Thank you. The floor is yours, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to bring this motion to Council this evening, and what I'm seeking to do here is to bring to the attention, once again, not dissimilar to the short stay accommodation motion that I moved previously, to ask state government and Legat to have a look at this issue around bringing reasonableness into an area of operation that was actually, through our colleague, Councillor Goyne, was in applying for leave for pregnancy. I began to think about the way that happens and the process. This isn't about changing the process of actually applying. This is actually about looking at the other side in terms of injecting fairness. I don't think that it's appropriate in a modern work environment that leave could, in fact, be denied for a reasonable application. And in fact, when I went and looked at the other jurisdictions around the country, Victoria, in my view, the only jurisdiction that have actually got it anywhere near right, in which reasonable applications for leave cannot be denied, which is the right way round, in my view. So that's what I'm trying to see injected into the process. I think that it's very peculiar in this modern environment that we're way behind the eight ball in terms of what happens out in the real world and what Fair Work expect employers to do. I appreciate that we're not here as employees, but that doesn't mean that there should be an opportunity for appropriate leave applications to be denied. Now, I'm not saying that would be abused, but it certainly could be. It's open to that at the moment because council could refuse somebody an application for leave without appropriate reasons. So I'm just, while this might seem quite small, I actually think it sends quite an important message about the way we expect to conduct ourselves in this place, and the balancing of the rights and responsibilities that councillors should have available to themselves. So I'm really looking forward to contributions from colleagues on this one. Obviously, it's not changing anything here tonight. It's sending off to LGAT and to the state government. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Councillor Goyne.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Councillor Ritchie for bringing this notice of motion and the attention that I believe that it deserves. Obviously, having been in the position I found myself in, newly elected and surprisingly pregnant after 10 years of not being able to have children, it certainly brought about a bit of anxiety on my behalf, not being aware of the situation and knowing how the process would go in applying for leave. For those that are listening at home, I just wanted to I've had a lot of people say, you know, when I go off on maternity leave, and as all those sitting around the table were aware, there is no such thing as maternity leave because we are not employees, we are elected members. But I think it's just important that it is recognised that in situations where, you know, it is a reasonable request for leave, that LGAT should, you know, look into the provisions for applications of leave of absence. So thank you very much, and I hope that my colleagues strongly support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Gawain. Councillor Hume.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do have a little bit... well, first of all, I want to thank the Deputy Mayor for addressing this issue and for also the comprehensive research he's done. It's not something that I've really thought about a lot in the past until now. So, you know, it is an important issue to bring up. I did have a bit of an issue in the motion that it was... I thought it was a bit too prescriptive in exactly what sort of, you know, regime we suggest the Minister put in place. But having said that, I'm still willing to support the motion. If it was a policy that Council was adopting, which we don't actually have the ability to, I might not support in exactly that form, and I might sort of, you know, tinker around the edges a bit. But having said that, we are just writing to the Minister and we are lobbying for a change. So on that basis, I'm willing to support it because I support the principle that we need to have an overhaul of the leave provisions, and there are a couple of reasons for that. One of them is for things that you really should be entitled to leave for, and for things that it may also be very personal issues that you request leave for. You are in the hands of your colleagues, and maybe that's not an appropriate system, and particularly you would hope that colleagues around the table, that other councillors would take a very professional approach to this and not, knock back very reasonable leave requests for political reasons. But you can imagine on a council where if there is a lot of politics, if there is a lot of division, that's the sort of thing that could potentially happen. And there's no guidelines as to how councillors are to make the decisions, and whether they can, whether they should consider a certain request reasonable or not. We could, for whatever reasons we want to, knock back a very reasonable request for leave, or even approve a very spurious request for leave. So, it's not something I've thought about, but I know on the occasions where I've asked for leave of absence, my last term on council, I had 2 children born and I had my honeymoon, so it was a time of a lot of change in my life. So there were times when I needed some absence from council for what I thought was good reasons, and thankfully that was granted. But yeah, this is something that really needs a good look at across the entire local government sector, and as the Deputy Mayor has done, to look at what best practice, or maybe not so good practice, is in other jurisdictions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hume. Anyone else wish to make a contribution? Councillor Mulder. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. And yes, it makes eminent sense, but the bit I like about this one is that leave with appropriate reason becomes a matter of right. And we can all sit around here, Councillor Hume, and we can all talk about, oh, well, we wouldn't do this, we wouldn't do that. Can I remind you of what happened at Glamorgan Spring Bay when the Mayor was diagnosed with leukaemia, and halfway through his treatment program he did the standard thing of applying for extra leave, and a bloody-minded council actually left the chamber, so there wasn't a quorum, so he couldn't be granted a leave, so that he lost his mayoral allowance to take him through to the day he died. That is the sort of thing that happens if you get a position where leave for legitimate reasons isn't granted of life. And to me, I thought that was about the most disgusting, disgraceful thing that I had ever seen a council do to anyone. And that's why we need this sort of thing that says leave with valid reasons. No, not just because you don't feel like turning up for half a year, but you still want to take the dough. No, if you've got valid reasons, and I'm still to hear some from Councillor Goyne, but anyway, if you've got valid reasons, then this should be a matter of right, and that's the bit I like. The rest of it, as far as I'm concerned, go he. But such base politics to be played in that scenario is just terrible.
Anyone else wish to make a contribution? Councillor Darko, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to thank the Deputy Mayor for moving this, and I want to commend you for the thoroughness with which you've done so, particularly noting having adoption in here, having domestic partners in here, and as we know, the evidence says that if both parents are caring for the child, then you see better outcomes for the child, but you also see less discrimination in the workplace when both parents are going to have the same amount of time off. So thank you for your thoroughness in addressing this.
Councillor James, you're warming up.
Thank you. I'm just interested in that B1, and that is that a councillor be able to advise the relevant council of a leave of absence as of right. I just find it very difficult to accept the fact as of right, and we are saying that that is the way it ought to be, and that is what is being suggested to the Minister and to the local government office, that it be a matter of right. Now, already we have in our, and the Chief Executive's Office comments are covered on page 168, and if a councillor wishes to take leave of absence in respect of one or more meetings, the council or chair on behalf of the council may request. In this particular motion, as of right. That is really what it's saying, that there isn't that request, and therefore this has to be taken as part of little dot point 1, and then it's subject to those other issues that are listed in 2, 3 and 4. So if as of right was taken out, then I would support it, because I don't like to have being told, or basically telling the Minister and for the local government office, local government association, to have that motion placed on the agenda. Okay, that's all part of the process, because at the moment we have to deal with what is actually in the regulations, 215, and that does give us flexibility in being able to do what we can. And part 2A, the council may grant. Now, may grant a request for leave of absence from one or more, etc., and may grant, part B, a council committee may grant a request. So look, that is how I think, as responsible, professional, let's not use professional people, we are a mix of professional and other different way of life in our capacity, but nevertheless, this motion hinges on the word, and that is as of right. And whilst it's there, I will not support it, because I believe that the current regulations are adequate, and this is really very prescriptive to try to cover all bases, when in fact the regulations at the moment, and they may change given there is a reform in the process. So having said that, I'll sit down. Thank you.
Right. Well, anyone else wish to make... Councillor Kennedy.
I didn't think that I would need to say anything about this other than thank the Deputy Mayor for allowing us to have a right. Thank you.
Councillor Warner, thank you.
Thank you. Look, I appreciate the motion coming before us. 100% behind point A, and as far as point B goes, authorises the Chief Executive Officer to write to the Minister of Local Government on behalf of Council to request the Tasmanian Government to introduce updated regulations as soon as practicable. If it was all about me, I would have deleted everything from that point onwards in point B. And the reason for that is, whilst these are possibilities, I think the strength in this motion is actually getting the topic on the table for debate, looking at best practice interstate, getting the contributions of other councils around Tasmania and actually other groups wider outside of council to see best practice outside of the sector. But I'm not going to sit here and take 100% of nothing when, you know, there's 65% of great. So I will be supporting it, and the ramifications will be, I think, that when it goes in front of the Minister's desk, I think highlighting the concept will be the main impact of the motion. Dot points, 1 to the Roman numeral points, if you want, are things to consider, but they're not the main fulcrum of this debate. It's really around a contemporary, a nimble, and a more rational leave system that doesn't end up with situations as Councillor Mulder highlighted, and also, if you like, incentivises people to consider coming into council rather than possibly disincentivising. So take the partial win, people, and back the motion if you can.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Anyone else wish to make a contribution? Councillor Chung.
I wasn't going to, but I feel obliged to. I'm sorry. Thank you, Councillor Ritchie, for bringing this to our attention. And I just find it incredulous in some ways. You know, we're not employees. We recognise the fact that we're not employees. But we're still people, and we should still have rights as people that make common sense. We've never in this chamber refused anybody leave, as far as I'm aware, ever. Usually we suggest people might like to stay longer. But having said that, as Councillor Mulder has said, theoretically we could. You know, we could say no. We could walk out of the chamber. We could say to Emma, sorry, Councillor Goyne, you need to stay here. We probably wouldn't, but, you know, we could theoretically do that. And I think, you know, I think this motion is really important because it says that everybody has rights, and we should all recognise that.
Thank you, Councillor Chung. Anyone else wish to make a contribution? Deputy Mayor, right of reply, please.
Thank you. And can I just say thank you to colleagues for all of your contributions and input. They're greatly appreciated. And Councillor Walker is right and Councillor Mulder is right. This is about the principle. Let's not get too bogged down in some of the changes or review. If the Minister agrees to review this, I'm fully expecting that this is not going to get up through the Minister's desk as it's been written. You'd expect to see tweaks, changes, other considerations. I'm just hoping that this actually makes the review process with the Minister to actually get something happening. It's really important that we do. I know Councillor James is a bit concerned about words like must, but out in the workplace, it is must. You know, I manage many staff, as other people here do in their roles outside this place, and you cannot deny leave for employees for an unjustified reason. That is a must that we all live with and work with every day. They're the rights reciprocated. There are obligations on employees as well to be able to provide sufficient notice, adequate reasons if requested, all of those things, and it goes both ways. It is about rights. It's a bit of a shame that, and I would point out that the state parliament and the federal parliament, to my knowledge, still probably haven't got this right either. They certainly didn't in my time there have any of these sorts of protections in. It was up to colleagues to decide whether you weren't accused of vacating your seat if you went to have a baby and weren't able to come back. So those sorts of things still exist, strangely, in our society and particularly in our democracies, which you wouldn't think they should, but they do. Let's hope that this maybe even starts a conversation, not just for our level of government, but even for others that are long overdue. So I really appreciate the support of colleagues, and I look forward to seeing where this goes.
Well, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Colleagues, the notice of motion saying the name of Councillor Ritchie regarding council leave of absence provisions. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Great. So carried. Thank you. Moving now on to item 10, councillors' question time. I note that there's nothing at 10.1 or 10.2. 10.3, answers to questions without notice, previous council meeting, as listed in the agenda. Moving on to 10.4, questions without notice. Are there any questions from the floor? Starting this evening with Councillor Kennedy, please.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Well, thank you. Councillor Chong?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Warren?
Chair, I have two questions. The first one is a follow-up to Joan Marsh's excellent question this evening on putting up a notice for wildlife in the Belrive Fort. I think that's particularly interesting because it's not an area where you would necessarily expect to see that. Now, my question relates to the fact that there has been a number of requests from across the municipality for warning signs to say slow down wildlife, which have been refused, notably in Gellibrand Drive and also in Lauderdale, I believe. And I know that I've talked to officers or put in elected members' requests more than once on this and been told that the policy is that these signs are actually not very effective and therefore council doesn't put them up. And I just wondered if that is still the policy. But I would still like to reiterate at the Belrive Fort, which is basically a suburban area where you don't necessarily expect to see wildlife, that it just might make people stop and think. But I'd be interested to know whether it's still the officer's policy not to put up such signs.
Thank you, Councillor Warren. Mr Graham?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the research has shown at the moment that signs are mostly ineffective in terms of wildlife. In most cases, people are visiting areas that they know of. So you learn in the area, people are known to ignore signs over time. We've certainly discussed with other councils. The University of Tasmania has been doing some research. We are always open to listening to if there's ways that we can improve this. Having another sign in an area can be an additional hazard in terms of people think. But we are still open to listen to if there are ways that we can actually actively decrease the amount of roadkill in our municipality.
Thank you, Mr Graham. Councillor Warren, your second question, please.
I've been contacted by a number of residents from Montague Bay Montague Bay Road, I should say, in relation to recent parking infringements by parking on the side of the road near the grass, where they've parked for 20 years and encourage their visitors to park because it's safer than parking on the house side where cars have been sideswiped and present a safety issue for cars coming around that bend near the beginning of Montague Bay Road. So my question to officers, through you, Mayor, is has there been a change in policy? I don't believe there are any no parking signs in this area. So I just wonder why cars that have parked there for 20 years without infringements are now being given parking fines of $90.
Thank you, Councillor Warren. Mr Brennan or CEO, or should we take this on notice? Mr Brennan? Thank you. CEO, Councillor Warren, we'll come back to you on that. Thank you for your question. Councillor Darko? Councillor Goyne, you can from the seat if you'd like. Thank you. Councillor Walker?
Thank you. It's one question. It might have a couple of sequels in its mix, so take it as you wish. And it might be a question that's taken on notice. But in relation to the 2022 council election, which was done under compulsory voting, do we have a breakdown now of the costs versus 2018 and a figure of how much they've increased?
Thank you for your question. I understand that we do, because I received a memo on that several months ago. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what it is. Mrs Murrell, are you able to provide some information, please?
No, I can't remember off the top of my head as well, but we can provide you with that same memo.
Thank you.
And then the second part to that, I guess, is whether we can seek information from the TEC about what it costs them to operate a voting booth in something like a legislative council election area, and get some rough hypothesis of the costs that we might have incurred for having to do that informal process as well.
Certainly. Thank you, Councillor Walker. We'll come back to you on both those fronts. Thank you. Councillor James.
Yeah, thanks. Firstly, the advertising sign on the corner of Rosny Hill Road and Bligh Street, there's been a couple of representations in relation to whether or not it would require a subsequent DA to change the actual signage viewing from, say, I think at about 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. at night till about 7 a.m. in the morning. So my question is, would a change in the advertising, because currently for those who are unaware, it's 24/7. It goes day and night, and it has been quite...
This is the Eastlands, Councillor James.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you.
Eastlands put the application in. So my question is, would it require another DA in order for us to consider, if we have that opportunity, for a change of viewing or the signage operating on that site, please?
Thank you. Sir,
Thank you. I'll need to take that one on notice. I think the short answer is yes, but I'll need to confirm.
Councillor James, you have a second question?
Yep, the other question is, thank you, is it was raised in this place a little while ago regarding the Geilston Bay Boat Club jetty that's sort of submerged. I thought that we did have an answer that work was underway, or that the Crown, that I think is involved in this, was working with council and probably the boatyard, because boat club, or whatever it's called, Geilston Bay Boat Club, yeah. And perhaps the Mr Graham, if he's the appropriate officer, or yourself, Mr Nelson, could advise council on the current situation in relation to that, please.
Thank you, Councillor James. Mr Graham, please.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we're just waiting on the final building certification documents for that, and then we can, from the building surveyors, and then we can put that out for quotations for builders to remove and demolish and remediate the area. So we are hopeful to be able to put the quotations out by next month.
Thank you, Mr Graham.
Is Crown Land going to cough up some money for that?
Councillor James, sorry, thank you. Two questions. Councillor Hume.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have two questions. So, first of all, in workshops where we were discussing the budget, I asked whether it would be possible to get a report which outlined the unspent developer contributions across the city, whether that's for car parking, public open space, etc. Wanting to get a sense of where those contributions are, and also what the age is of those contributions. I'm just wondering what's the progress of that report, and will we receive it in time for our adopting the budget?
Thank you, Councillor. I'm sure we will. Mrs Merrill.
Yes, I'm currently working on that. I was away sick last week, so unfortunately I couldn't do it, but I'll get it to you this week.
Thank you. Your second question, Councillor.
Second question. I've been rather alarmed by seeing the number of tenders where the submissions come in well in excess of the pre-tender estimates of projects. Cost of infrastructure is obviously going up quite a lot at the moment, and I'm just wondering whether there's a process, as we receive those submissions from tenderers, is there a process where, well, first of all, I'm interested to know whether how often that is happening, and whether there's a process by which we feed that back into coming up with our budget estimates or our pre-tender estimates. What sort of process is used there?
Thank you. Mr Graham, would you like to answer that one, please?
Through you, Mr Mayor, we do review tenders in terms of, during the time of the design, we are trying to, because the tenders are often done with the budgets are often prepared only at a concept stage of drawings. It's not until you do detailed design that you get an understanding what the actual construction estimate might be. I think in this financial year we might have had 3 tenders go well over budget, but the rest have been on budget. The ones gone over involve high risk, so the one coming up later tonight, the Percy Street, and I believe there was a play park that went over budget, and that's because of the nature of that industry where it's there's limited contractors who can undertake the work. For the remaining road projects and that, I believe they've all been on budget at the moment. So it doesn't arise all the time. Certainly in the last 2 or 3 years, it has been very challenging. If there's ones that we feel that there's no way that we feel that we can fund those projects, we'll come back to council and consider ways, or whether it might even have to wait to next financial year in terms of budget constraints and how we might be able to fund those. Or if we feel that they're not important, that we might need to come back to council, as compared to they're not a priority project. It's addressing flooding, for example. I hope I answered the councillor's questions.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Councillor Hunter. Councillor Mulder.
Yeah, the state government seems to have exchanged $350 million of federal roads funding as part of the Macquarie Point Stadium funding deal. Does council have any assurances that funding for local roads will not be sacrificed as the State Grants Commission moves through its opaque road funding allocations?
Councillor Mulder, thank you for your question. CEO, Mrs. Murrell, thank you.
Through you, Mayor. Sorry, back off. The State Grants Commission money, actually, we found out just last week we'll be getting more funding through the State Grants Commission, through the federal budget that was released. In relation to how they distribute that money, that's a pool of funds. They have to just distribute that money. So we're assured, or not assured, but we believe that that can't change. The pool will remain the same.
I want to say too that, of course, next Thursday we've got the state budget as well, so that might be more instructive as well. Second question, Councillor Mulder. Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. My question is, does council collect any data in relation to roadkill across the municipality, and if so, can that be provided? And does council work with state government in relation to roadkill collection and sharing of data? And if so, any information around that would be useful.
Thank you. Mr. Graham.
Through Mr. Mayor, in terms of roadkill, we certainly collect data on the roadkill that's reported to us for collecting. We don't have any other data on private citizens collecting roadkill. I'll take that on notice in terms of the Department of State Growth, in terms of the state highways, and we'll find out what information they have.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Do you have a second question?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, well, colleagues, we now move to our closed meeting. I'll call for a motion to move into closed meeting. Thank you, Councillor Hume. Seconded, Councillor Kennedy. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you. So passed. So thank you to those members of the public who attended in person this evening and those that joined us from home via the live stream. As we now move into closed meeting, I bid you good night and look forward to seeing you here again in 3 weeks' time. Thank you. Please end the feed.